A woman fired without warning. A mother left without a home. A life reduced to what she could carry. No one expected her to rise again, but the mountain had other plans for her. After the layoff, after the last paycheck evaporated into gas and dry noodles, after sleeping 2 nights in her rusted car with her dog pressed against her ribs for warmth, she found the shack. It leaned sideways like it had survived storms out of spite, half collapsed, roof sagging, windows broken, door hanging on a hinge that forgot loyalty years ago. But it was $180. All she had left. Her dog, Willow, circled the place the way she circled strangers, silent, tense, reading the ground like it carried stories no human could hear. The air smelled of damp wood and long winters. The grass bent beneath the weight of forgotten years, and the shack stared back at her with the tired eyes of a place that did not remember being loved. Still, it was something with a roof. Something she could step inside without being asked to leave. At the doorway, Willow paused, her body stiffening, ears rising sharply as if listening to something beneath the floor. But the woman was too tired to notice. She pushed the door gently, and it fell inward with a hollow thud, sending dust swirling like ghosts disturbed from their long rest. She stepped inside and whispered the truth aloud, as if saying it made it real. So this is home now. The shack groaned like it disagreed. The first night, she lay on the floor with Willow curled at her feet, both wrapped in a thin blanket she had owned since college. Sleep came in fragments, cold interruptions, memories she did not ask for, the taste of worry pressing against her teeth. Every few minutes, Willow lifted her head, looking toward the boards beneath them, ears twitching as if something breathed down there. The woman stroked her fur. "It is just the wind," she murmured, but Willow did not relax. By morning, she began clearing debris. Old chairs collapsed in corners. Rusted nails scattered like broken intentions. A layer of dirt thick enough to hold footprints from ghosts who never left. While sweeping, she spoke softly to herself, the way people do when silence feels too heavy. "I can fix this. At least enough to sleep without worrying the roof will fall on us." Willow gave a quiet bark, as if agreeing. But when the broom scraped near the back corner, Willow bolted forward, pawing at the floorboards, nose pressed to the wood with frantic urgency. "What is it, girl?" "Mice." Willow whined, a sound the woman rarely heard from her, and pushed her nose deeper between the cracks. The woman knelt and tapped the floor. Hollow. The sound did not belong in a house this size. It echoed deeper, as if the shack were perched above an old forgotten space. She pressed her ear to the boards. Silence. Cold, old, unmoving silence. For a long moment, her breath froze in her chest. Images flickered, root cellars, abandoned wells, places where secrets slept too long. She pulled back quickly, shaking off the thought. This house was falling apart. Of course the boards were hollow. She continued cleaning. Willow continued pacing. By late afternoon, exhaustion forced her to sit by the doorway and breathe. Her body ached, her eyes burned, her hands trembled from hunger and too many days without rest. Willow lay beside her, watching her with the kind of worry only a dog can give. "You saved me once," she whispered, stroking her head. "Let me save us now." Willow's ears perked, then suddenly she stood, tail stiff, body tense. Before the woman could react, Willow darted across the room, shoved her snout beneath the largest floorboard, and yanked. The wood splintered upward. "Willow, stop!" But the dog kept pulling, tearing the softened edges until a gap opened wide enough for her to squeeze through. No, Willow, wait." The woman crawled across the floor, but Willow had already disappeared, slipping beneath the house, swallowed by the shadows. Her heart crashed against her ribs. "Willow." She pressed her face to the floor, her voice breaking into the dark. "Willow, come back." Silence. Only the slow drip of water beneath the shack. Minutes crawled by. Her breath shook. Her eyes burned. She whispered again, softer this time, as if afraid the earth itself might hear. Please, please come back. Then movement. A soft scuffle. A low whine. Willow reappeared, her head emerging from the darkness, covered in dirt, eyes wide with urgency. She held something in her mouth. Not a bone. Not a stick. Not trash. A piece of old metal caked in soil. Willow dropped it into the woman's hand. It was cold, heavier than it should have been. A worn plate of hammered iron with markings she could not read, like symbols etched by someone who lived long before she was born. Her breath tightened. Where did you find this? Willow barked once, a short, sharp sound, and immediately dove back into the darkness beneath the shack, as if urging her to follow. The woman stared at the hole in the floor, the cold draft rising from beneath, the faint smell of old earth and something else. Something metallic, something ancient, and beneath it all something waiting. The shack she bought for $180 was not a home. It was a doorway to a tunnel no one knew existed. The hole in the floor seemed to breathe. Cold air rose from it in quiet waves, carrying the scent of old stone, wet soil, and something metallic that lodged itself in the back of her throat. The woman sat on the splintered boards, her legs folded awkwardly beneath her, staring into the darkness as if it might stare back. Willow paced in tight circles, tail rigid, head low, every movement a wordless insistence. Slow down, she whispered, though her own pulse had begun to race. You cannot just disappear on me like that. Her voice tried to sound firm. It came out thin instead. She took the piece of metal in both hands, wiping away dried earth with her sleeve. It was not a random scrap. The edges were too even. One corner curved as if it once fit into a rounded shape. Faint marks etched into the surface caught the light that slipped through the broken window. They were not letters she recognized, not numbers, just shallow grooves drawn by a hand that wanted something remembered. Her stomach tightened. Her mind reached for logic. Old heating ducts. Animal tunnels. A collapsed root cellar. Places no one had thought about, because this was a shack no one wanted. But there was something deliberate in the way Willow had gone down there. Not like a dog chasing a sound. More like a dog following a scent older than the house itself. Let me see, she murmured. She slid closer to the opening and lowered her head until her eyes met the dark. At first she saw only shadow. Then, as her gaze adjusted, she caught faint impressions. The curve of hard-packed earth, a narrow slope, the suggestion of space widening below the house. Willow, she called again, softer now. The dog's nails scraped against rock. A heartbeat later, Willow squeezed up through the gap a second time, this time panting, her fur dusted with gray soil. She dropped another object onto the floor. This one was longer, thinner. A rusted rod, rounded at one end, flattened at the other. She had seen something like it once in a childhood museum visit. Rail hardware. Her pulse stumbled. She brushed the dirt from Willow's forehead and tried to swallow the dryness in her mouth. Is there more down there? She asked. Willow wagged her tail once, hard, then turned and disappeared a third time without waiting for permission. The woman sat back, pressing the heel of her hand against her eyes. This was too much for a day that had already been full of too much. Only that morning, she had been in the city, standing in a strip-lit office while a manager avoided her gaze and spoke in careful phrases. We appreciate your service. The company is restructuring. It is not personal, but losing the job had felt personal. So had the weeks before that, when bills waited longer than meals, when her name on an application carried the invisible weight of failure. She had driven until the city shrank behind her, until the highway gave up and turned into smaller roads, until the smaller roads became cracked, narrow threads between trees. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking about the destination. She had only searched for somewhere the world might forget her. A sign with peeling paint. A listing taped in the window of a local store. Property for sale. As is. $180. No guarantees. It had felt like a joke. Then it started to feel like a chance. And now, as she sat on the floor of the shack she could barely afford, holding rusted metal pieces dragged from beneath her feet, it felt like the beginning of something else entirely. Willow clambered up again, this time struggling a bit, her sides brushing the torn plank as she emerged. She shook herself off and dropped a third prize on the boards, a small rock streaked with a dark vein that shimmered faintly, even in the weak afternoon light. The woman frowned. It was not ordinary stone. The surface around the vein was rough and pale, but the dark line gleamed almost like polished glass. She turned it slowly. "Where did you find this?" she asked again, knowing the question was useless and asking anyway. Willow only sat, breath fast, eyes bright, gaze fixed on the hole. The woman stood and scanned the room. There was a crowbar near the collapsed doorway, half buried under straw and old newspapers. She dug it out, wiped away cobwebs, and carried it back. "All right," she said quietly, more to herself than to the dog. "If you're going to keep crawling down there, I need to know what you are finding." She wedged the crowbar under the board Willow had already loosened and pried. The wood protested, then gave way with a splitting crack. She pulled up another plank, then another, until the gap widened into a ragged opening large enough for her to squeeze through. A dark slope fell away beneath the house, already traced by Willow's paw marks. The air rising from below was damp and still. It smelled like stone that had not seen the sky in a long time. She hesitated. She had no helmet, no rope, no guarantee the ground would hold. Logic flickered through her mind, whispering of collapses, of headlines about foolish people who had gone exploring alone. But exhaustion carried its own recklessness. So did desperation. She took a flashlight from her backpack, one of the few things she had remembered to keep when life began narrowing to essentials. Its beam cut a slim tunnel of light through the dark. "Stay close," she told Willow. Then she lowered herself into the hole. The soil crumbled slightly under her boots but held. She slid the last bit, landing on a narrow ledge of compacted earth. Willow bounded down beside her, landing with ease and trotting ahead with the familiarity of someone walking into a place already claimed. The flashlight beam swept forward. The crawlspace beneath the shack did not end where it should have ended. The ground dropped away again a few feet ahead, revealing a passage, low but walkable, carved through the earth. Old wooden beams braced the ceiling at intervals, some still firm, others sagging. She recognized the construction style from photos she had once seen in a documentary. This was not a natural hollow. This was a mine tunnel. Her chest went tight. "What are you standing on, Elena?" she whispered to herself, using the name she had not heard anyone say kindly in months. The tunnel breathed out the cold of decades, and Willow, tail high, stepped into it as if returning to a forgotten path. Elena moved slowly, testing each step before trusting it with her full weight. The tunnel floor was uneven, a patchwork of old rock, packed dirt, and short stretches of rotted planks. Moisture clung to the walls, beating in small droplets that caught the flashlight beam like tiny stunned stars. Willow trotted ahead, never too far, glancing back every few seconds to be sure Elena followed. Her paws made soft sounds on the damp earth, her body a small, steady flame of life in the close darkness. "Do not rush," Elena whispered. "Please." The tunnel curved gently, angling downward. As she walked, she saw more signs of deliberate work. Cut marks in stone, rusted metal spikes embedded in the walls. A fragment of old rail half sunk into the ground, the twin of the hardware Willow had dragged up. "This was all under the shack," Elena murmured. All this time, the story wrote itself in her mind despite her efforts to stay in the present. A small mining operation, probably unregistered, dug quietly beneath the trees. Men descending day after day, chasing veins of rock that promised something valuable. Someone building a shack above later, perhaps ignorant of what slept under the floor. She swallowed. Maybe not ignorant. Maybe very aware. Her flashlight washed over the walls again, and this time she noticed something else. The same dark streaks she had seen in the stone Willow carried up. Thin veins winding through the rock, some barely visible, some thick enough to slice the wall from floor to ceiling. She stepped closer to one and lifted her hand, fingers hovering just shy of the surface. The vein seemed to hold its own light, not bright, but reflective, like polished metal or glass. It shimmered faintly when she moved the flashlight aside, as if soaking up whatever light it could find and giving it back in reluctant folds. She had never seen stone behave like that. "What are you?" she whispered. Willow barked once, the sound echoing down the tunnel like a question answered too quickly. Elena moved on. The deeper she went, the more the air changed. It grew colder, sharper, but also strangely cleaner, as if the dust of the shack had been left behind with her old life, and this place belonged to an older breath. Her thoughts wandered despite herself. Being fired had felt like an erasure. One day she had a desk, a badge, an inbox full of problems to solve. The next, she had a cardboard box with a plant wilting in it and a manager who would not meet her eyes. The job had not been a dream, but it had been structure, something she could point to when she needed to explain who she was. Now the mountain did not care about her title. It cared only that she kept walking. The tunnel widened slightly, enough to make room for what had once been equipment. She found an abandoned wheelbarrow half-eaten by rust, a bucket crusted with old mineral dust, an imprint in the dirt where a crate might have sat for years. The flashlight beam caught something small near that mark. She knelt, brushed away loose soil, and picked up a rock fragment with a thick dark vein running through it. This one gleamed more intensely, as if each internal edge had been shaved by a careful blade. For a moment, she remembered a museum display from childhood, a case of minerals under glass, each labeled with a name she could not pronounce. Some had descriptions: rare, high value, used in electronics, essential for modern technology. She turned the rock in her hand. If this was anything like that, it did not belong in a collapsed shack under a woman with $10 in her bank account. She slipped it into her pocket. Willow had stopped ahead, tail still, head tilted. Elena walked up to her and saw why. The tunnel ended. Or rather, it opened. The passage spilled into a chamber carved roughly into a rounded shape. Old beams crisscrossed overhead, holding back the weight of stone that wanted to sink. In the center of the chamber ran a jagged seam of exposed rock, almost like a frozen river pressed sideways into the wall. And through that seam ran a thick, unbroken vein of the same shimmering dark stone Willow had found. Here it was not just a line. It was a band, a broad, gleaming ribbon stretching from floor to ceiling. Elena's breath caught. She lifted her flashlight higher, and the surface responded, catching the light and scattering it back in muted flashes, like a constellation trapped inside the mountain. It was beautiful in a way that startled her, even through the fear. She reached out and laid her fingertips gently against it. The stone was cool, but there was a density to it, a kind of weight that felt different from ordinary rock. She pressed lightly, then withdrew her hand, suddenly afraid to disturb it. "Willow," she said slowly, "do you know what you have found?" The dog sat beside her, eyes following her hand, chest rising and falling in even breaths. Elena had nothing but guesses. But even her guesses frightened her. Whatever this was, it looked valuable. Not in the way of coins or bills they used to send her in her paychecks, but in the way of raw material, something people built around and fought over without ever seeing the place it came from. Her shoulders tensed. She could almost hear investors' voices. Companies. People who would see this and see only profit. She thought of the shack above, of the printed words on that scrap of paper in the store window. As is. No guarantees. The seller had either not known, or had decided not to tell. She swallowed. I need to know what this is, she whispered, before anyone else does. The air in the chamber seemed to hold her words in its hollow space. She took a step back, then another, forcing herself to turn away. She could not stay down here long. The tunnel, for now, was holding, but she had no tools to shore it up, no training to judge whether the beams would give. She followed Willow back the way they came, her flashlight beam tracing their path like a fragile tether. Back at the edge of the crawl space, she climbed up first and reached down to guide Willow through the gap. The shack's dusty air felt suddenly thin after the cold purity of the tunnel. She stood in the middle of the room, heart pounding, dirt streaked across her jeans, the stone heavy in her pocket. The decision waiting in front of her pressed hard. If this was nothing, she had wasted an afternoon and frightened herself for no reason. If this was something, she had stumbled onto the kind of discovery that changed entire lives. Hers, and perhaps other people's too. She sat on the floor and rested her head briefly against Willow's shoulder. I cannot lose everything again, she whispered. If I do this wrong, I will. Willow leaned into her, solid and warm, the only thing in the room that felt unquestionable. Night crept in through the broken window, the last of the gray light pooling on the floor. Elena reached for her phone. There was one person in town who might know something about old tunnels and strange stone. She had seen his name on a weathered sign near the feed store. Retired geologist. Consulting. No job too small. She stared at the number scribbled on the back of a receipt. Her thumb hovered. Trusting anyone with this terrified her. But not understanding it terrified her more. She dialed. The phone rang for so long she thought it would never be answered. Each empty second stretched, filled with the imagined sound of the mountain closing back over what she had seen. At last, a voice came on the line, rough with age and disuse. Yeah. Is this Mr. Harmon? The geologist? Elena asked, trying to steady her tone. Silence, then a short exhale that might have been a laugh. Used to be, last time I checked. Who is this? My name is Elena. I just moved into a property outside town. There is. She glanced at the hole in the floor, at Willow watching her closely. There is something under my house I do not understand. That's so, he said. If it is mold or rats, you want pest control. It is not that. I think it is an old tunnel. A mine tunnel. And there is rock down there that looks different. Silence again, but this time of a different kind. Where exactly is this property? He asked. She gave directions slowly. The old logging road. The split in the pines. The leaning shack that had probably been marked as unlivable on some forgotten list. He listened without interrupting. You are in the old North Spur area, he said at last. They poked around up there years ago. Word was, it did not pay enough to keep going. Company packed up, left things as they were. Then the records got lost like they always do. What kind of things? Elena asked. Minerals. Core samples. Maybe a vein or two they never bothered to finish mapping. Hard to say without seeing it. Her fingers tightened around the phone. If I sent you a photo, she said slowly, could you tell me if it is worth anything? I can tell you if you found something interesting, he replied. Worth anything is a different question. Value depends on who is looking. You have reception out there. Barely. I will try. She crouched near the window where the signal was slightly stronger and snapped a photo of the stone she had brought up, the dark vein clear against the paler matrix. The image took a long time to send. She watched the little bar creep forward, heart beating in time with its progress. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Willow settled at her side, head on her knee, eyes on her face. Minutes dragged. She had begun counting her breaths to stay calm when the phone buzzed again. Where did you say you lived? Harmon asked, his voice changed now tighter. She repeated the description. Another pause. You are telling me that rock came from under that shack, he said. Yes. You are sure you did not pick that up from the riverbed or anywhere else? It was in a chamber at the end of a tunnel, she said, braced with old beams. There is a seam of it down there. A big one. His exhale was low, almost a whistle. That is not just interesting, he said. That is very rare. You are sitting on a deposit of something people pay a great deal of money for. The words landed heavy. They did not float the way she once imagined words about money would float. They sank. What is it? She asked. I will not say for certain from a photo, he answered, but it looks like a high-grade critical mineral. The kind they use in batteries and electronics, and a dozen other things the modern world begs for. There was talk once that the North Spur might hold promising veins, but the company that came through cut corners. They drilled in the wrong places and gave up. So they missed it, Elena said. Looks that way. He paused. And now you have found it. She looked around the shack, at the cracked walls, the broken glass, the way the place hunched against the wind. Everything in her life until now had been about scraping by, taking what little was offered, saying yes to bad shifts and late paychecks because the alternative was nothing. Now the alternative was standing under her feet. What do I do? She whispered. First thing, he said firmly, you do not tell anyone else. Not yet. Not your neighbors, not the shopkeeper, nobody. There are people who hear millions and stop hearing anything else. You understand? Yes, she said. Second, you let me come out and look at it properly. I will bring some tools. I can tell you how real this is. After that, you will need legal advice. Claims. Land rights. You do own the property. Yes. I bought it. I have the papers. Good. That helps. But mines attract attention. Companies. Investors. Maybe worse. If this is what I think it is, you have stumbled onto a loaded table. You need to decide very carefully how you sit down. Her mouth was dry. This could change everything? She asked, hearing the smallness of the question. Could, he said. Could also eat you alive if you are not careful. They agreed on a time. He would drive out the next morning, weather permitting. After she hung up, Elena sat in the silence, the weight of his words pressing down harder than the roof above. Willow nudged her arm gently. This is good news, she said aloud, as if trying to convince herself. We need this. We need something to go right. Willow blinked, breathing slow and steady. In the corner of the shack, the hole in the floor waited, edges rough, darkness quiet and patient. For the first time since climbing into the tunnel, Elena felt a flicker of fear that had nothing to do with beams or collapse. If this vein was as valuable as Harmon suggested, then the world beyond this mountain would eventually come looking. And nothing stayed untouched forever. That night she slept near the doorway with Willow beside her and the phone within reach, waking at every rustle. Yet no one came. The mountain kept its secrets one more night. In the thin pale of morning, a truck engine cut through the quiet. She stepped onto the leaning porch as a battered pickup pulled into the clearing. An older man climbed out, his hair gray, his frame wiry, his eyes sharp as if they had gotten used to reading landscapes instead of people. You must be Elena, he said. She nodded. He glanced at the shack, at the warped boards, at the sagging roof, then at the ground beneath. This is as miserable as I remember, he said softly. All right. Show me where your dog has been digging. She led him inside. Harmon stood at the edge of the opening in the floor, hands on his knees, peering into the shadows as if they were an old book he had read once and almost forgotten. Your dog found this? He asked. Yes. She would not leave it alone, Elena said. She kept bringing things up. Metal. Rock. Smart animal, he murmured. Willow watched him closely, ears flicking as he shifted his weight. He lowered himself into the gap with surprising ease for a man his age, boots landing solidly on the slope beneath. Elena followed, flashlight in hand, Willow sliding down with them as if leading the way. In the tunnel, Harmon moved with the careful assurance of someone who had spent his life underground. He tested the beams with his palm, tapped the walls in a few places, listened to the subtle differences in sound. "Old work," he said quietly. "Small crew, probably. They opened just enough to chase a lead, then lost their nerve or their funding." At the chamber, he stopped speaking altogether. He simply stared. Elena watched his face rather than the wall. She saw the moment his professional distance cracked, the way his eyes widened, the way his jaw tightened. "Well," he said finally, "you were not exaggerating." He stepped closer, lifted a small hammer from his belt, and lightly tapped the edge of the vein. A thin fragment fell away. He caught it in his hand and held it up to the flashlight, turning it slowly. "This is very high grade," he said. "If analyses confirm what I suspect, this seam alone could be worth a great deal. Millions, if they extract it properly. More if it runs deeper or branches." The word did not sound like it did in advertisements or on lottery shows. On his tongue, millions sounded heavy. Dangerous. Elena felt both hope and dread twist inside her. "Could I sell this?" she asked. "Not all of it. Just enough to." "To what?" "Buy a proper house. Fix the roof. Pay off debts. Finally exhale." "Legally, that depends," he said. "If your deed gives you mineral rights along with surface rights, then yes, you own the output. If not, the company that last held the claim might have a say. If they went bankrupt long ago, the state might. It will be a tangle." He met her eyes. "But you are not powerless. You found this. On your land. That matters." She nodded slowly. "Do you want my advice?" he asked. "Yes. Do not sell this outright to the first person who knocks," he said. "People will come offering quick money. They will tell you that you are lucky. They will offer more than you have ever seen in one place. What they will not tell you is what they will make from it once you are gone." "What should I do instead?" she whispered. "Find a lawyer who can read contracts. Someone local enough to care what happens to this place, but not so local that they owe favors to anyone involved in old deals. Consider a partnership instead of a sale. Royalties instead of a lump sum. Negotiate environmental protections. Control who comes and how long they stay." He glanced upward, toward where the shack stood directly above. "And if you can, make sure you have somewhere else to go while they work. Mines are not gentle neighbors." It was too much. Too big. Her mind skittered over the advice like a stone over water. "I just needed a roof," she said quietly. "I did not ask for all this." He studied her for a moment, his gaze not unkind. "Life rarely asks whether you are ready," he said. "It just drops things on your doorstep, or under your floorboards." They brought samples up, and he packed them carefully into a padded case. Back in the thin light of the shack, he scribbled notes on a pad, sketched the layout of the tunnel as best he could, and then sat on an overturned crate. "There is another thing," he said. Elena, kneeling on the floor beside Willow, looked up. "If word gets out before you have your affairs in order, you could have uninvited visitors," he said. "Prospectors. People who remember old rumors. People who overhear in bars that someone at the North Spur found something worth talking about. You understand?" "Yes," she said, feeling her chest tighten. "Keep this quiet until you have that lawyer," he repeated. "And when you start talking to companies, never meet them up here alone." Fear rose, hot and cold at once. "I thought this would solve my problems," she said. "It might," he replied. "It might also give you new ones. The trick is to make sure you choose which problems you live with." He stood to go, then paused at the doorway. "For what it is worth," he added, "I have seen deposits like this in other places completely swallowed by corporations. No names remembered. No locals compensated. No one defending the land itself. Maybe this time, it can go differently. If you want it to." After he left, The clearing felt too quiet. Elena sat on the porch step, the boards sagging slightly under her weight, and stared out at the tree line. Willow pressed against her leg, head on her knee, warm and solid. "Millions," she whispered. The word felt unreal. Imagine that. But what came to mind was not mansions or cars, or any of the images she would have conjured in another life. She thought of a stove that actually worked, a bed where she would not wake up cold, a place where no one could call security to move her along if she fell asleep in the wrong corner. Softly, she said, "We could stop running." Willow's tail thumped once. The sun slipped behind the ridge, painting the trees in the last tired light of the day. The shack moaned as the temperature dropped, wood flexing after years of neglect. Elena stood and walked inside, closing the door gently behind her. She looked at the opening in the floor, at the darkness below. She would protect this, not as a prize, as a chance. Later, much later, when she sat with a lawyer in a small office that smelled of coffee and dust, she would negotiate terms that surprised even her. She would insist on environmental oversight. She would insist that a portion of the profits stay in the town that had watched its jobs vanish. She would insist that her name be on the documents as more than a seller. And years from now, when the tunnel had been expanded and stabilized, when controlled extraction had turned that dark vein into lights humming in distant cities and batteries humming in distant cars, she would still remember the first day she stared into the opening and thought only of saving a dog and replacing a roof. For now, none of that existed. There was only the shack, the tunnel, the dog, and the knowledge that under her feet lay the proof that she was not broken beyond repair. She had been told all her life that people like her did not inherit anything except debt. The mountain disagreed. Months later, when spring thawed the last patch of snow behind the shack, Elena stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the mountains breathe. The legal work had begun, slow and tangled, but she was no longer walking into offices alone. She had a lawyer who believed her, a geologist who defended her, and a future that no longer felt like a punishment waiting to happen. Willow ran ahead, bounding through tall grass, pausing now and then to look back at her with that familiar, steady gaze. The dog who had led her into the dark had also led her out of the life that once held her down. Elena touched the side of the shack, fingers brushing the warped wood. The place that had once been a desperate purchase made by a woman with nowhere else to go. Now it was the doorway that saved her, the place where a new life had begun underground before it could take shape above it. "We are going to be all right," she whispered. Willow trotted over, pressing against her leg as if confirming the promise. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, the quiet breath of a mountain that had revealed just enough to those who listened. Elena took one step toward her future, then another. And for the first time in years, she did not feel lost.